My name is Patrick Roberts. I'm Associate Director of Marketing and Technology for ECU Career Services, and I'll be serving as today's moderator for the panel. First, let me welcome everybody and make sure that they understand that today we're doing what we're calling a reoccurring series called Career Expert Panel, featuring successful ECU alumni sharing their knowledge and advice with fellow ECU Pirates. Today's topic is the keys to virtual interviewing. We'll be discussing some tips and tricks related to how to really help prepare and be successful when you're doing virtual interviewing. Of course, this topic is very relevant today because of with COVID and everything going on. There's been a huge increase in a lot of employers using virtual interviewing platforms, not only pre-recorded, but also live virtual interviews using platforms like this, Zoom. So we thought this would be a really relevant topic for alumni. And of course, we do want to take a moment to emphasize and recognize that it is a unique time with COVID-19. There's a lot of uncertainty about the future, not only in higher education, but across the board with many employers. So our first priority, of course, is that everybody's staying safe, healthy, and I think most importantly at this time, sane when it comes to, teleworking and balancing work life and professional obligations as well as personal obligations. So that's foremost. And our goal with these sessions really is to create a sense of community with ECU Pirates and make sure people do feel comfortable connecting virtually. And then we do hope to, we know that we will be returning to campus soon. We don't know when, but when we do hope that this kind of helps establish that relationship so that you do feel like when you do come to campus, you can reach out to people and connect face to face. So that's our hope with these sessions. And what we've done is we've provided the list of questions, preset questions for the panelists to have. But outside of that, if you do have a question, if something comes up, please feel free to type it in the chat. We do have Mary on board from Alumni Association. She's going to be monitoring the chat today. So if you do have a question, feel free to type at any time and we'll jump into those questions as well. And we're going to leave some time at the end for questions. I do also want to remind everybody that this is being recorded. So there will be a recording of the session and that will be posted on the Alumni Association's page. So just make sure that you're aware that it's being recorded and that you can share this with fellow alumni if they're not able to make the call today. So with that being said, and all the housekeeping stuff out of the way, I do want to turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about themselves. So how about we start with you, Spencer, if you want to jump in with just take a moment to introduce yourself, including your name, employer, and title, as well as when you graduated from ECU and your major or department that you graduated from.
Yeah, awesome. All right, so I'm Spencer Walston. I'm a local to Eastern North Carolina. This is home. I graduated ECU in 2014, BS in Business Administration. I loved my time at ECU, and I think that's what really has kept my wife and I here in Greenville. This is home. This is where we wanted to raise our kids, and we love it. I'm currently working with Google. And with Google Fiber specifically, I'm the head of sales, so I cover all the different sales channels for Google Fiber. I'm based out of Durham. I commute a few days a week. Fortunately, lately, I've been working from home. And I say fortunately because I've loved it. Not having to commute to Durham has been great. But yeah, I'm very happy with it. Love the company. I've been working there since November. It's been great.
That's great. George or John, feel free to jump in next. George, you want to jump in?
Sure, I'll be happy to. Good morning, everyone. Actually, it's morning here in Texas. It's in the afternoon for all of you on the Eastern Seaboard. My name is George Hendley. I am the founder of the Speakers Academy as well as George Hendley Presentations. I've had my own business now for 28 years. I had the joy of being a graduate of East Carolina University way back before some of you were even born, 1972. So I held back a good 48 years ago. And my time at East Carolina University was a very special springboard for me to launch into my adult life and into the career that I've enjoyed for especially the last 28 to 30 years. The arena that I was in at that point in time, my major was what was then called health and physical education. And I think it's now under the what's the new name? It's got a new name, but bottom line, it's not under that title anymore. But I still am a teacher of sorts, but just not in the public schools like I thought I would be involved in. I currently live in the great state of Texas, just outside of Dallas, and I don't get back to East Carolina very often. Actually, the last time was 8 years ago, and I went in the fall of 2012 for my 40-year reunion, and I went for the letter winners weekend in October and got to see a great football game and meet with some of my old buddies that I played football with long time ago. So it's great to be a part of this panel. I appreciate the time to share a little bit of what I know from my career, and hopefully it'll be helpful in the bigger picture to some of our current ECU folks that are graduates and job hunting.
That's great. John?
Well, good morning, good afternoon. I make my living partly with technology, and yet when you said somebody jump in, I was struggling to unmute myself. So we still make mistakes every now and then. My name's John Morris. I graduated from East Carolina University in 1982 with a degree in music education. Like the other gentleman, it was a very good time. East Carolina was very good to me. I wasn't always the best student, but there were people there who believed in me and helped me in a way that I'm still benefiting from all these years later. I've worked in hospitality. I've worked in the airline business. I've worked in healthcare. I spent a couple of years as a consultant helping companies write training. And 2 years ago, I took a permanent job with a company here in Connecticut. I live in Connecticut, called Quadient. It's a mailing, shipping, and software solutions company. I feel very fortunate to be with them. And I appreciate the opportunity to join everyone for this panel today.
Well, that's great. Thank you guys for your introductions there, a little background. So let's jump right into the topic of virtual interviewing. And I think to start with, just to not separate it from actual interviewing, the first question we have here is just, what advice do you have for those that are preparing for an upcoming interview? And then to bring that down to, what's the difference between preparing for a virtual interview versus in person? But we can just start with whoever wants to jump in with just advice that you have for preparing for an upcoming interview.
I like to, like I said, I work with technology and databases, learning management systems. Now I'm doing a lot of work with remote tools, and a lot of the design of the technology tools that we have is based on real life situations. Like for example, I think that when Zoom sat down with a blank piece of paper to put Zoom together, they were creating a workflow and a piece of software that would work similar to a real meeting. So a real good way to start out with a virtual interview is to prepare in a similar way that you would for a live in-person interview. That a lot of what you're going to be doing is going to be the same, but there are going to be a couple of differences. One of the big differences is that you're not going to they'll look them in the eye, shake the hand, give them a firm handshake through a virtual platform. So what the substance of maybe your research of the company and the questions you ask at the end of the interview are going to be a little bit more important than they might be if you're at an in-person interview.
Yeah, that's good. That's good advice.
I'll just share, kind of to touch on that in the prep work beforehand. This is different for a lot of people. A lot of people are not used to, telecommuting and video conferencing. I'll share, my wife, for example, despises it. She's never liked to FaceTime. Not her thing at all. And 6 months ago, I was probably in that same boat where I had no desire to FaceTime with someone. And these video conferences, they felt awkward. But like anything else, practice and spending more time with it. Google has been doing video interviewing for years now. And, we do 0 conference calls. All of it is video based. and this was well before it was, popular and, people working from home. We've always had the video conferencing to make it feel a little more in person. But the biggest preparation piece that I would say is try to log in the night before. One big thing, we use Google Hangouts. It's now converting to Google Chat for our video conferencing. And it's a lot of people use FaceTime because it's on an Apple phone that everybody has. Google Hangouts is different. It's something you may need to add to your computer. Fortunately, it's now in Gmail, so it's a little easier to use, but you wouldn't believe the number of people that are ready for their interview and they try to log in on Google Hangouts 2 minutes before the interview and realize that they have to download software or that their mic is not compatible. And then we end up running 15 minutes late on an interview because the applicant's just now trying it for the first time. So certainly making sure you're prepped, you know how to log in to the technology, and you're ready on the call for when it starts.
That's good. I want to echo the things that both John and Spencer said. I use a very simple 3-letter acronym that I work with, the people that I work with primarily who are business leaders who want to speak with confidence. That's the majority of the coaching time that I spend. And that 3-letter acronym is PDF. PDF like a file, but it stands for preparation, delivery, and follow through. Preparation, delivery, and follow through. Now, the actual interview is the delivery phase, but the preparation which goes before is helping you prepare not only for your delivery, but also actually for your follow through, which is a very critical piece that oftentimes people forget about or don't handle well. But that preparation piece it's just like my days back on the gridiron. We spent so many hours in practice compared to that one little block of time on the actual playing field. And that's the case for all of your lives in the professional world. You can look at every single day that you go to work as preparation for that day, as well as the next day, as well as even a future job a year or 5 years down the road. So the preparation piece never ends. It's an ongoing piece of the bigger puzzle, and you have to approach it in a very professional mindset. There are so many things that go into good preparation. What Spencer said was a critical piece. I've been on Zoom for 3 years, and so I've built a comfort level because of my time coaching people on Zoom for almost 3 years. Had I not done that, I would probably be much more uncomfortable today, but I've set up my environment around me physically. I know mentally what to expect. Occasionally there's some little zippity doodahs, things that happen, but at the same time, you recognize that anything we do technologically will never be perfect, but you have to sort of, bend with the flow and make things work the best that you can. So those are just a few thoughts that quickly come to my mind in this particular piece of preparation for what you're doing in that interview.
Well, and I think, George, your point is a perfect example, not to put John on the spot, but I think he owned it earlier when he said, I do technology, but I was having trouble unmuting myself. And I feel like that's a really specific example of when you're doing an interview and you own it and you say, hey, oops, I didn't unmute myself. Like, I think that makes you a human, first of all, but also an employer probably will get a chuckle out of it, and it makes the whole conversation flow. So instead of being like a robot and thinking that it needs to be perfect, you kind of own up to the fact, because everybody has struggles with technology. We can't predict certain things, right? So that's an important point, I think, again, as we talk about virtual interviewing, for people to own and kind of be okay with making a mistake here or there, but having the prep work in place to where you are as comfortable as you can be. To keep going with that point, though, I think, do any of you have any specific preparatory or preparations that you like to see, again, whether it's an in-person interview or virtual interview, that you like to see when you're conducting interviews?
Well, I'll jump in first on this one. Again, I try to work from some simplistic point of view, and I use what's called the 3 V's. The 3 V's of a great delivery is the visual, number one, the vocal, number two, and the verbal, number three. The visual, vocal, and verbal. And in preparation, as well as in the delivery, you have to first and foremost think about what is the visual that you want to present. The visual will be the predominant thing that people look at and consider, even over the vocal or the verbal. And if you're not visually looking like you're a professional and prepared, then right away they're starting to have mental problems or roadblocks in the light of wanting to connect with you. I looked at the pictures that the three of us had, and John and I and Spencer all had on coats and ties. Well, the two of us had, John and I had on a coat and tie, Spencer had on an open collar shirt. So I least expected Spencer today to come with a jacket on, but he showed up looking like a real pro. I like that, Spencer, good job. I'm a more casual considering the overall environment, and John even may be a step below me. But the picture is, here's a rule of thumb I always use in teaching people about presentations. You dress at or slightly above the level of your audience. At or slightly above the level of your audience. You can't go wrong. If you're below them, they're thinking, maybe this lady, maybe this man is not really serious about doing the kind of professional level work we want him or her to do. So that's the bigger picture. The visual reigns supreme in light of what they're judging you on. And beyond that, you've got other things to add. But if that's not handled well, you're in trouble.
Any others that want to add to that about preparing, specifics to preparing?
Just to build on what Spencer said about practicing or being ready with your tech, perhaps get a friend and do a mock interview using a similar platform to what the virtual interview is going to be on, so that you understand what you look like on your screen and how everything works. And one of the things that I think is important is your background. And I'm sitting here in my home office, which is a storage room. I don't know if you can see the upside down table behind me, but so I don't think this would be a very good way to do a virtual interview with this background. But George mentioned having an environment that is conducive to showing who you are. And I agree with that wholeheartedly.
Mm-hmm. Anything else you want to add, Spencer, before we move on to the next question?
No, they've nailed it. That's it.
Okay,
Good
great.
here.
So the next question we have on our list here is, what stands out to you when conducting virtual interviews? You mentioned things like background, of course, being on time if the software is working properly. Anything else specifically that, when you're conducting virtual interviews that stands out to you?
We've kind of touched on already, just, being prepared. You can always tell, and you can tell it's the same, when they're in person, the questions that they're asking, and being there and being present in the moment, asking the right questions. Again, you wouldn't believe the number of people that come in for an interview and they don't know too much about Google Fiber. And it blows my mind that you'd be here, interviewing for a leadership position, and you haven't done your research. And you can always tell, in the answers, and, just certainly don't think that this is any different just because it's virtual. You still have to prepare. You've got to do your research. I think there's some benefits of being able to not being there in person. You can have a lot more notes in front of you. And, don't be afraid to have some notes ready. Don't look like you're reading off a script, but, just have your preparation and be ready for
it. Something that I've noticed in doing interviews is sometimes people have silly email addresses or silly Skype handles. I can't really give any examples because some of them aren't suitable for G-rated audiences, but that's something to be cognizant of, especially if you're coming out of your college years where that kind of thing was okay. Now all of a sudden you're looking for a job, and having a silly email that might have been a lot of fun when you were 20 years old may not fly when that's one of the things you're using to make a first impression with an employer. And I notice I wanted to give a shout out to George, the way he's using his hands up where we can see them. Yeah, there you go. I think that's really great. That's something that I might adopt myself in future meetings.
That's good. So back to you, Patrick, in light of your question, I again use these various little acronyms, memory tools is what I call them, to help me remember, as well as to help me share with others something that will help them more easily remember. So I use what I call the know, S-A-Y formula. Know, say, know, say. So what does S-A-Y stand for? It's subject, audience, yourself. Subject, audience, yourself. And over to Spencer, he was talking about knowing your audience. If you're going in for a virtual interview, holy cow, today it is so easy to know your audience. I went out and went over Spencer's LinkedIn page again. I tried to find John. I couldn't find John, but hopefully John and I'll be able to link up after this whole thing is over. But I can tell you things about Spencer that he probably would be shocked that I know. Spencer, varsity football, varsity track, he's a chess man, he's a scholar, he's an athlete. He shows that he knows where he's going in life. Plus, I think he's even got a little business on the side. Is that right, Spencer?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Pirate properties. Yeah.
There it is. So today you can know so much about people with LinkedIn, with Facebook, with Google. Sometimes, again, you have to be careful with what you're allowing to show up about yourself. And as you get older, sometimes you just don't care. But at the same time, if you're especially going into the job market and you don't have a business of your own, you have to really put on the image of professionalism, whatever that might look like, sound like, be like for you. And that's different today than it was 30 or 40, 50 years ago. Very different. But at the same thing, knowing your audience, which is that company that you're interviewing with, that's a critical piece. It's an easy piece today, considering all the things that we have at our fingertips to use. I'll shut up.
No, that's great. And I was going to ask, since we've already kind of mentioned it a little bit here, but we can jump right to this question, which is, what types of research do you look for when you're interviewing a candidate? Because you've already mentioned some avenues like LinkedIn to do research, but let's say you are conducting an interview, whether it's virtual or in person. What are you listening for to let you know, okay, this person has actually researched us as an organization or me as an individual? What would you be looking for? What types of information?
I'll just share a quick example. I just 2 weeks ago, I had an interview for the position was it's customer acquisitions manager. It's our team that leads our door-to-door residential selling group. And the candidate, who was pretty sharp, was well dressed, asking some good questions, but then all of a sudden asked, he said, so what products does Google Fiber offer? Which kind of took me by surprise. If you're applying for a position that is about selling products of Google Fiber, you should know those things. And it's not like it's top secret information. That's very widespread. You can very simply go to Google Fiber's website and see everything that we offer. Right. And a follow-up question to that was he was asking about our competitors. So he was asking, who are your competitors? And I was torn between, is he trying to sound like he has done his research and he wants to know more, or does he genuinely didn't do any research and has no idea? And so I would just really come prepared, be ready for it.
Yeah. Others? Advice on?
When I went to work for my current company, at the time it was called Neopost, and I applied for the job, and then I received a call from the hiring manager saying, would you like to do a phone interview in the near future? And I said, you betcha. And right after I hung up, I said, wow, what did they do? I had no idea what Neopost did. And in February, we changed our name to Quadient. So a lot of companies nowadays, they don't just do one thing anymore. They do several, and there might be a part of what they do that is their core, the core part of their business. And Spencer mentioned competitors. It was important to the people that I was interviewing with that I knew that their biggest competitor was Pitney Bowes, which is also located here in Connecticut. So knowing these basic things about the company, maybe about its structure, the fact that the company is based in France, these kind of things are good to know.
That's great. George, any additional advice?
Yeah, I had a thought a second ago, and then it escaped me because I was really getting wrapped up in what John said. But back to Spencer. Oh, I know what it was. It's not so much, in my opinion, it's not so much the answers they give you to your questions. It is the questions they give you showing that they have done the research, as he kind of alluded to, and they know the bigger, broader picture of what your company is about and where it's going. Questions like, I read on your website that you have 5 core values. Are those core values really being lived by your employees, or are they just there for show? Now, some people would go, they'd be taken way back by that kind of question. But that's the kind of question that says, this guy, this gal is thinking deeply and long-term about being a part of the culture. And the values, vision, and mission says, I understand the culture as this. Is that really what the culture is about? And those kinds of questions help the interviewer go, this is a sharp person. Yeah. This person really wants to know behind the scenes. And when they dig in like that, then it says, okay, if they have that kind of attitude going into an interview, how much value will they bring to the organization once they're one of us, once they're part of the team? So the questions they ask are a critical piece in understanding them as a potential hire.
And I think that's important. And I tell students this in counseling sessions as well, which is showing off your research and the questions that you ask. So to go back to your point, and again, to bring up what Spencer was saying and John was saying about competitors, you could say, instead of saying, who are your competitors, you could reframe that to say, I see that 3 of your competitors are blank, blank, and blank. Am I missing anyone, or is there any additional one? So there, again, you're showing off research, but also letting them answer the question. And so I think that's an important point that those on the call today should understand is, don't just ask them an open-ended question and make it look like you've done no research. Add in that you've done some research. So that way they feel a little bit more confident. So I think that's great. And I think, to go along with that question, another point, and I think someone asked it here in the panel or in the chat, was what questions should one ask about the company? So what kind of questions do you like to see people ask? So we have here, of course, competitor, maybe mission, vision, values, location. Is there any additional questions that you like to see?
I tend to go for culture. Because culture is everything. When a new CEO is considering, or a potential new CEO is considering joining a company, they have to know in advance, will they be able to bring in a new culture, or are they A-okay with the culture as is? As an example, locally, one of the strongest culture-driven organizations and now respected organization is a little company called Southwest Airlines. Southwest Airlines years ago established the kind of culture that was synonymous with Herb Kelleher, who was their early CEO. And he was a fun-loving guy, and he was the kind of guy that was all about celebration, peanuts, low fares, having a good time. And people knew that, they loved that, they embraced that, and therein they've had for decades a waiting, high hiring waiting list that people want to get into a culture that they feel that they can have fun with, and yet at the same time that's going someplace important for the long term. So to me, culture is a big piece of the equation in the light of understanding behind the scenes. Do you have a playroom? Do you guys go out on Friday night together? What do you do in your off hours? That's all in understanding the culture. At least it is for me.
When I first moved out here to the East Coast, I was I interviewed for a lot of jobs in New York City. I live 60 miles north of New York City, and that's just where a lot of when I did a job search, that's where a lot of the jobs was in New York. And I asked every single one that I interviewed with, I said, "Do you allow remote work?" And this was 2-3 years ago. And some of them, that was taboo, absolutely not. And I never heard from them again. And some of them said, "Yeah, of course we do." Well, the ones that I asked and told me absolutely not, and I never heard from them again, that's okay, because we were in a good fit. If I ask them a question that excludes me, I think in the long run, that's good. And the question that George mentioned about culture, which I thought was a fabulous example. Are these 5 things that in your core values, is that just window dressing? Or are those things that you guys really live by? There are probably some interviewers that'll go, "I don't like that question." And your resume goes into the circular file. But then again, do you really want to work for that company if they are going to respond to that question in that way?
Right. That's a great point. Spencer, anything else you want to add?
Oh, I'm good.
Okay. One thing I would say that's a great point to bring up, John, about do you really want to work there? And I was going to mention this towards the end, but I'll mention it now. I think a lot of people overlook the fact that an interview is not only the company interviewing you for the job, but you should be interviewing them for the job. And so as you're listening to the responses, I think it goes back to this question of what should you be asking about the organization. Is I always ask students to think about at least asking them a question about supporting their professional development. What are they going to do to support your professional development? Because that's an important question to ask, especially, for those on the call that are recent graduates, but for anybody that's joining a new organization, it's important that you understand that they're going to support you in your development. So to go to another question in the chat here, someone asked, is it okay to ask the interview panel to turn on their cameras during the interview? What do you guys think about that?
I would probably stay away from it. If it's a video interview and they've asked for your video to be on, I would never interview someone and ask their video to be on and not share mine. But I would probably stay away from asking them to share theirs. There's probably a reason why they chosen not to.
Yeah. Others' thoughts?
Well, I'm a renegade in some ways.
Spencer's right on.
I agree with Spencer, because you don't want to push too hard, but at the same time, if they're not going to show their face, if they're not going to really interact with you, then it starts really building doubts in my own mind. Do I really want to work with these masked men, masked women who are not able or willing to show their face? It puts a question mark in my mind. So could I do it? Would I do it? Depends on the day of the week, maybe.
Yeah. What do you think, John?
I think Spencer was right on with you shouldn't ask them. But on the other hand, if just like the culture question, if you do come out and ask them, and that's something that disqualifies you for the job somehow, do you really want to work there? Right. So, but me personally, I would not. I would kind of wonder why they decided to have a video, why they just didn't use the telephone. you know, they want to see me, but they don't want to show themselves. I would kind of wonder, maybe they're sitting in a storage room like I am.
I think we had a good recommendation in the chat from David regarding this, which was maybe in a playful way or just as a suggested way, you might say, it appears your video's not working, and let them say either, oh no, we decided not to turn it on, or, you know, and again, it's not you being accusatory or asking them to turn it on. It's more just, hey, you know, is your video not working? So that way, I think it's a pretty good way to maybe approach that. So it's not as demanding, because, you know, let's face it, and most of us can agree to this, I'm sure, but during an interview, the employer holds most of the cards and you don't want to offend them. And this could be one of those things where you got to kind of play to whatever they want it to be, right? So good questions in the chat so far. Please keep adding those. We have a few more specific questions we have here. One that's very general, but we've kind of touched on a little bit of this, but is there anything specifically that people should avoid during a virtual interview?
To your point, we have kind of touched on it. You know, George really mentioned that the background, you know, you don't have to have a home office. You know, you don't have to have a designated spot that's dead quiet from the rest of the home. I've got a 10-month-old and a 3-year-old, so it's always loud in my house. Employers understand that, you know, in this crazy time where we're working from home, people get it. You know, there's a good chance any minute my 3-year-old could come up in the office and, you know, hop right up in my lap. I try to, you know, discourage it, but she's a 3-year-old. It's probably going to happen. You know, you can always laugh it off, but people are generally understanding. And if they're not, back to the culture piece of it, you probably don't want to work there. But don't have a background that takes away from you. You know, don't let your background be what the interviewer remembers you by. You know, either have a plain background or just a professional, boring background. I see in the chat, virtual backgrounds acceptable. I would stay away from a virtual background. I would so much rather get behind a plain wall with absolutely nothing behind me than to have, you know, me sitting on the beach in a pretend virtual background. You know, keep it professional. Plain is fine. You know, the point of the interview is you want them to remember you and not remember, you know, what your background was. That should not be relevant. In the same way with the attire, I believe it was George mentioned, you know, dress at or slightly above. 100% agree. Just because it's an at-home virtual interview, don't go in your pajamas. You know, look the part, look professional, treat it as if you were going there in the office.
Now, I will add something. You see, I've got on a pretty nice looking long sleeve, professional looking dress shirt, but I'm wearing shorts. So, and I'm willing to quickly admit that. I knew you wouldn't see the whole picture of me if I was there real. I, of course, have on my boots and my slacks, and I would be dressed for the occasion. But that's one of the reasons I love working through Zoom. They can see the top half. They can't see the bottom half. But in a face-to-face, they see the whole you. And the whole you is what they're looking for, because they're not just hiring the top half unless all you ever do is connect with them via Zoom. So one of the things that I thought of in light of something not to do, and that is be careful about your gestures. One of the things I tend to do from time to time is I put my hands together here, and I know if I do that too much, then it becomes a distraction. So how you use your entire body, gestures, facial expressions, everything. And one of the key elements, and this is a small one, but it's still a key element, if you're constantly looking up or over or around or down, then you're not really connecting with them from an eye connection perspective. And the eyes are the place. The windows of the soul is what the philosophers say, and you want to make them feel that they are looking at you and you are looking at them. So put your eyes as close to the camera as possible so that it looks like you're looking right at them. If you look at a television broadcast, they're looking directly into the camera because they can't see you, but they want you to feel that they are looking directly at you. And it's one little thing that makes a big difference in your appearance and your connectivity with them, being whatever distance you are from them physically. That's my 2 cents.
I like to, if an interviewee has no questions that's something that I will I kind of see as an indication. I think that everybody should have at least one question, and I've done this. I'm guilty of this, where I've been through the interview, and the interviewer has been very very thorough, and they come to the end of the interview and they go, "John, do you have any questions?" And I go, "No, you've answered them all for me." Well, that could be true, but what I could have done is I could have said, "Well, I came in here. I was going to ask you what your core business was, but you told me that was mailing and shipping. And I was going to ask you where you're based, and you told me that. You said that you're based in France. And even if they've answered all your questions, if you can still illustrate in some way that you had those questions coming in, it could be valuable to the outcome."
That's great. Yeah. And I think, to go along with that, someone's asked in the chat here about would it be bad to have a list of questions on the side to ask throughout the interview, or would it be seen as unprepared or unprofessional? And feel free to jump in with thoughts here, but my suggestion would be to wait, like you're saying, John, to the end of the interview to ask questions. Typically, probably not throughout. But what are your guys' thoughts on that?
I love having the notes. You don't have to look like you're reading off of a script. I certainly wouldn't come off looking like that, but that's one benefit of being remote, and them not seeing your full surroundings. I mean, you could certainly have a piece of paper right to your side with some questions. Definitely hold them to the end. I wouldn't ask them throughout unless it was, certainly relative to the point. But yeah, nothing wrong with having a list of questions.
I have mine right here.
There you go.
Those are the ones Mary sent me, so I put them right here in front of me so that I could be able to glance down from time to time to say, I wonder what Patrick's going to ask me next, because he's working the script right there. So I see it. You don't see me constantly looking down, but I'm able to glance real quickly, pick it up, and I think it's just part of the game. And again, if they're not seeing you constantly doing this and their eye connection is right up here, it makes all the difference in the world in light of, again, what they are seeing you do and how you're interacting with them.
Right.
And I'll just, I've got the same questions in another tab, so I can very easily, I still look like I'm looking at the computer, but I'm actually on a whole different tab looking at my notes. So yeah, I mean, there's being remote, it makes it a lot easier.
I was just about to say what Spencer just said, that I'm a big user of Microsoft OneNote, and I got notes in Microsoft OneNote, and they're directly below my camera. So I can read my notes, and you guys have no idea that I'm reading my notes. I don't know, some of you might. It's how well you can see where my eyes are going. But yeah, that's an advantage of being remote, is that you can do that. I hadn't thought of doing it the way Spencer said, where I could put it right in front of the window and I can't see any of you guys, but I can see my notes. So that's the way I do it.
So I think one point to add to that, and it goes back to some tips with virtual interviewing, is I always suggest that people don't get distracted by making sure you close out of any web browsers, or let's say your Outlook is open for email. Again, just a tip to add to those that are not used to doing virtual interviews. I think having a tab with your notes is good, but outside of that, I would make sure you don't have a tab with Facebook or with anything that has a messenger component, because you can easily get distracted during an interview by getting dinged for something. Another question that came up here, and we've kind of went over this a little bit, but what's a good question to ask during the closing of an interview?
I like behavioral questions. And right now I'm working in support of a customer service organization, a call center. And the call center is actually located in Carrollton, Texas. And I'm located in Banbury, Connecticut. So out in your neck of the woods, George, with the call center. So I would ask a question like, can you tell me about a time where you provided a level of service that made you proud? Tell me about that time. And the interviewee can then tell me a story about something that would give me some insight into how they would handle a situation that they might encounter while working for me. And behavioral questions like that, they're hard to fudge. That it's relatively easy for the interviewer to determine whether the person providing the answer really did what they said they did, really has the insights that they say they have with regards to that situation. That's the kind of question that I would like to ask in an interview.
I have a two-part question, and I'd separate it part one and then part two. The first question I would say is, you hire me, I come to work for you. What would be the thing that would make you so excited 6 months or a year down the road that you hired me? What would have to happen that you would be going, man, that was a great hire? And then I'd let them answer that and really listen carefully. And then I'd say, let's flip the coin over. 6 months or a year down the road, you go, oh my gosh, bad hire. What had to happen on my side in what I did or didn't do that would make you go, he was a bad hire? And then you're able to get the bigger picture, what we'll call each end of the spectrum, the really happy one and the really bad one. And if they're honest, and you hope that they will be, that's going to give you a broader swath of what their expectations or desires are, as well as what they're hopefully not going to see from you in the big picture.
That's great. Spencer, anything else you want to add there?
I'd like to offer a 30, 60, 90-day plan at the end, especially if it's a second or third interview where you've gotten a little bit more of the details about the role. If they don't have anything else at the end, I sometimes will ask, hey, I've prepared a 30, 60, 90-day plan. I can, walk you through it now, or I'm happy to email it to you, and just kind of offered it up. And, so one thing I've always seen, especially with good ones, when interviews come in and they're prepared like that, you don't have to be exact. Cause you're not going to know what you're going to be doing 90 days from now. You can have a very generic ballpark idea, and you could be totally off of what the position will actually have. But the fact that you spent time to prepare and you've put some thought into it would be huge. I love seeing a plan, a strategic written out plan of showing what you could bring to the table. It's really good, something to offer at the end.
That's great. And so we're getting to close towards the end. If there's any last minute questions, feel free to drop those in the chat. Again, to go along with this closing remarks or good questions to ask the interviewer, one thing that we always suggest from career services perspective is, what are the next steps in the process? What's the timeline look like? Is a good question, I think, to close out an interview as well, because it gives you that sense of how did you do, as well as a sense of timeline of when you should move on to another opportunity. We always suggest following up, but that's important to, again, get a sense of the timeline. So when that opportunity arises to ask that question, we definitely suggest that. Just a quick response from the panelists here on following an interview. Do you prefer handwritten thank yous, emails, both, or why?
I love handwritten. If you've got a mailing address, handwritten is awesome. That's again, it goes into the effort. It's an extra step when you handwrite it. So I love getting those. Email at the bare minimum. I want to see a thank you note. I love a thank you note after an interview.
Great.
I work in the mailing and shipping industry, so I would like to get a handwritten that preferably has used some of our equipment to set it up and send it. But when I worked at the University of Texas, I got maybe 2 or 3 pieces of mail per quarter, and nobody knew who I was. Nobody knew where my office was, because we did everything with email. And I did do a couple of interviews, and it was a long time before I ever saw those. I ever saw those thank you notes, the handwritten ones. So it kind of turned me around, and I thought, well, in today's world, or at least the world I was in at the time, maybe email is better, because I just wasn't getting them. And even where I am now, I think I've been there for 2.5 years, and I think I might have gotten 2 pieces of mail the whole time. And the people in the mailroom, they just don't know where I am. So I do like the handwritten, like Spencer says, but there's a trade-off with the expediency of an email, or perhaps you can do both.
Mm-hmm.
So I know I'm old school. So here, within just easy reach, are 2 handwritten thank you notes that I had right over here on my back bookshelf. You know how long they've been there? Months.
Mm-hmm.
Months. In other words, you tend to keep things like this because they're rare. In today's world, it tends to be very digital, very email or text oriented, and people, especially old school guys like me, we crave to see those who are willing to take the time and write a handwritten note that's legible and then put a stamp on it and put it in the mail. These kind of things stand out in a big, big way. So I'm just echoing Spencer and John in that same sentiment.
And I'll add one more point. You know, obviously it doesn't help you if the decision maker is making a decision that afternoon immediately after the interview. But I've seen a lot of times, you know, if you're debating between a handful of resumes, you know, it gets put in a stack and they put some time. If that thank you letter, you know, comes 3 or 4 days later, it's a reminder. And oftentimes it can get that resume put back to the top of the list when otherwise it would have been forgotten about. So there is a little benefit to coming a few days later.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we are approaching the end. For those that aren't monitoring the chat, definitely check it out. We've just posted a few other resources. Mary's posted some for alumni, and one that relates to what we're talking about today from Career Services. We do offer a free resource called Interview Stream, which allows alumni to practice and record themselves doing practice interviews virtually with their webcam. So definitely check that out as a resource. Again, that's free for any alumni that want to register. I posted the link in the chat. So the last question we have here, and this is just, again, just a fun question that we're asking alumni, but what's your favorite part of being an ECU alumnus?
Football.
There you go.
Tailgating in the Student Pirate Club. I miss the Student Pirate Club lot. That was some good times.
The thing that I love, and I so cherished about that brief visit I had 8 years ago, was growth. You can't imagine what it's like for somebody like me who's been away from campus for decades to go back to ECU now and see the growth. It's mind-boggling. You know, you just walk out there and go, this is how it was. This is how it is now. I mean, just the fact that we've got a medical school, a med school there. I never in my wildest imagination could see little old ECTC, ECC, ECU, which was right as I'm getting on campus, turn into a place like that. It wells up the pride within me, and it just makes me glad that I had that as an early part of my early adult life, and a great place to grow, a great place to learn, a great place to now point back to and say, look at what they continue to do at this point in time. I love to see the growth of the campus, but even more especially, I love to see the growth of the individuals who are coming out of there and bringing what they have to the world. Growth.
That's great.
I spent several years out west in Utah, in Texas, and California, and people that had actually even heard of East Carolina were few and far between, especially in Texas there were a few, but out west not a lot. So I spent a lot of time explaining to people, yeah, there's a place called East Carolina. Yeah, there's also a Greenville in North Carolina. Yeah, there's one in South Carolina. I know about that, but this one's in the one in North Carolina. So I've always enjoyed meeting other alumni, and during those years, there weren't a lot. Driving down Highway 635 through Dallas one day, I saw a guy that he had a ECU flag flying on the outside of his SUV, and I was probably George, and I had my ECU hat on. And I pulled up next to him and I took the hat off and I rolled the window down and I held it out the window, and he saw it said ECU, and we were waving and blowing our horns as we drove down Highway 635 there in Dallas. So that was, I enjoy those kind of interactions with people that I have nothing else in common with except for the fact that we're both ECU alumni.
That's great. And someone commented in the chat here saying pirates are everywhere, so that's absolutely correct. So, well, again, let's thank our panelists for today. This has been a really good session. We really appreciate you taking the time to be here and providing some of your knowledge and experience to our fellow alumni. And now I'm going to turn it over to Mary to give us a little bit more of a wrap up and some additional resources.
Yes, thank you all for joining us today. And thank you to George, John, and Spencer for your time and for sharing all of the lovely advice with us. And for our participants, thank you for tuning in. Today's panelists can be found on our networking platform, ECU Connect. ECU Connect is the pirate network to use to locate fellow pirate alumni, faculty, and staff. You can find new job and career advice, learn about pirate events near you, and keep updated on everything ECU. So you can activate your profile at ecuconnect.com. Additionally, we have 3 more installments coming up. They'll be posted on our website soon of career expert panels with a variety of new alumni who are serving as our panelists. Further details will be posted online at piratealumni.com/career panels. The next one will be on June 9th, and then we'll be going every other week. But you're welcome to go on there. Our video from our last session about resumes is posted on there, as well as the recording for today will be posted within the week as well. And also, we do have a variety of other virtual and digital resources of some other webinars. We have cocktail creations, we have sessions about astronomy, we have some family-friendly activities. You can check out all of our digital resources, piratealumni.com/digital resources. And so a lot of these links are also included in the chat for your reference. So thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you soon. Go Pirates!
Go Pirates!
Thank you.
Go Pirates! Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.